Welcome to Warriors of the World. Today we'll be exploring how Vikings really fought, separating myth from historical reality. Subscribe now to join our community and support this project. Now, let's begin. Our popular image of Vikings as enormous warriors with horned helmets wielding massive axes differs substantially from the historical reality. Osteological studies led by Anna Kellström at Sigtuna reveal that Norse men averaged approximately 5 feet 7 inches in height, barely taller than other contemporary Europeans. The controversial concept of the Berserker, according to Roderick Dale from the University of Nottingham, likely combines specific battle rituals, breathing techniques, and psychological self-suggestion, not the consumption of hallucinogenic mushrooms as commonly portrayed. The infamous horned helmet has never been found in authentic Viking archaeological contexts. Gareth Williams from the British Museum confirms this image is a 19th-century invention, primarily popularized by Wagnerian opera productions. Vikings were not a specialized warrior class, but a society where combat was a natural extension of daily life. Neil Price from Uppsala University emphasizes that modern distinctions between combatants and civilians would have made little sense in the ancient Scandinavian mindset. Contrary to popular imagery, the sword was the most prestigious weapon among Vikings, though its high cost limited it to wealthy warriors. And Peterson from the National Museum of Denmark explains that they represented an investment comparable to 16 cows, often passed down as heirlooms and mentioned with personal names in the sagas. Viking swords utilized pattern-welded steel, a technique where multiple iron bars with different carbon contents were forged together, creating flexible yet durable blades with distinctive patterns. The axe, more economically accessible, represented the most common Norse weapon. Viking war axes had thinner blades and lighter heads than their utilitarian counterparts. Researcher Nil Glaisel has demonstrated that these weapons, generally weighing between 1 and 2 pounds, could be wielded with surprising speed and precision. The spear, underrepresented in popular culture, was actually the most universal weapon among Vikings. Discoveries from Gokstad and Birka suggest that virtually all warriors carried spears, offering superior reach and versatility for both thrusting and throwing. The bow played a crucial role in Viking warfare. Remains found at Hedeby indicate powerful bows approximately 6 feet in length, capable of effective ranges up to 200 yards in experienced hands. The main defensive element of the Norse warrior was the round shield about 30 inches in diameter. Findings from Gokstad reveal relatively thin wooden constructions that were surprisingly effective against cutting weapons thanks to their cross-grain structure. Mail armor, known as brynja in Old Norse, appears frequently in narratives and occasionally in archaeological finds such as the Jormungbo grave. Judith Jesh from the University of Nottingham notes that it represented a considerable investment, limited to wealthy or professional warriors. For those without access to metal armor, alternatives existed such as padded tunics and hardened leather jackets, which provided effective defense against cuts and mitigated the impact of blunt strikes. Regarding helmets, only one relatively complete example, the Jormungbo helmet, has been discovered in a Viking context, showing a simple design with eye and nasal protection. Viking martial training began in childhood. The sagas consistently describe children practicing with weapons from 5 or 6 years of age. Archaeological findings support these narratives, with numerous settlements producing miniature training weapons. Scandinavian daily life was, in effect, continuous training for potential conflict. Osteological evidence analyzed by Niels Linnerup shows distinctive muscle development patterns consistent with regular rowing, heavy carrying, and other daily activities that develop the functional strength needed for effective combat. The shield wall formation, skjoldborg in Old Norse, represents the most emblematic tactic in the Viking arsenal. This defensive formation provided the disciplined backbone that contradicts the stereotypical image of the Norse warrior as an unrestrained individualist. The basic mechanics involved warriors positioned shoulder to shoulder in one or more rows, with overlapping shields creating a continuous barrier. The saga of Harald Hardrada describes how shields had to be aligned from the ground to the shoulder, with each shield overlapping about half of the next. Contemporary Anglo-Saxon descriptions, particularly the Battle of Maldon, confirm the systematic use of this formation, called Bordwell in Saxon sources. Ryan Lavelle from the University of Winchester notes that these descriptions are particularly valuable as they represent first-hand observations of enemy tactics. Archaeological evidence complements these literary accounts. Wound patterns on battle victim remains show concentrations of injuries consistent with close formation combat, particularly wounds to lower extremities, suggesting attempts to break the integrity of the wall by attacking beneath the shield edge. Contrary to cinematic portrayals where the shield wall quickly disintegrates into individual combats, the effectiveness of this formation depended precisely on its sustained cohesion, creating a stable platform from which warriors could employ their weapons while maintaining a defensive position. Viking maritime prowess represented their most distinctive strategic advantage. The Viking ship constituted a revolutionary technological achievement. Jan Bill from the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo explains that these vessels combined extremely shallow draft, high maneuverability, impressive speed, and capacity for both ocean navigation and shallow river travel. Viking naval tactics rarely involved ship-to-ship combat in the Mediterranean style. Richard Abels observes that the Norse conceptualized their ships primarily as transport platforms, not as weapons themselves. The true Viking tactical innovation was the development of sophisticated amphibious operations. Pierre Bauduin documents how the Norse established fortified bases on coastal islands or peninsulas, creating secure points from which they could launch raids while maintaining a water escape route. The Strandhog tactic, literally beach slaughter, involved rapid landing, attack on targets near the coast, and withdrawal before local forces could effectively organize. Claire Downham from the University of Liverpool explains that speed was absolutely crucial, allowing Vikings to complete operations in hours while local defensive responses required days. Experiments with replicas such as the Sea Stallion of Glendalough have demonstrated that Viking ships could maintain speeds of 5 to 10 knots for extended periods, regularly covering 75 to 100 miles daily in favorable conditions. This combination of strategic mobility, amphibious capability, and logistical self-sufficiency provided the Vikings with a fundamentally asymmetric advantage over the more static defenses of their European contemporaries. The Viking command structure represents a fascinating hybrid between egalitarian and hierarchical principles that significantly impacted their military effectiveness. The traditional image of Viking warbands as loosely organized mobs belies a sophisticated leadership system that balanced individual initiative with coordinated action. The fundamental military unit was the lid, a retinue of warriors bound to a specific leader. Leadership positions were not purely hereditary but depended substantially on proven combat ability and success in previous campaigns. Magnus Magnusson of Edinburgh University notes that Norse society exhibited remarkable social mobility within its warrior class, allowing exceptionally capable fighters to rise to command positions regardless of initial status. Contemporary accounts frequently mention the role of the Hersir, a local military leader who functioned as the backbone of Norse tactical organization. Archaeological evidence from high-status warrior burials at sites like Ballater and Crunk Moor on the Isle of Man, analyzed by James Graham Campbell, reveals distinct patterns of weapon arrangements and grave goods that archaeologists associate with these tactical commanders. Decision-making in Viking armies followed what Preben Meulengracht Svensson describes as consultative leadership. While chieftains held ultimate authority, sagas consistently describe councils before major operations where experienced warriors would voice opinions on tactical approaches. This system capitalized on collective wisdom while maintaining clear chains of command necessary for battlefield coordination. The famed Danish Great Heathen Army that invaded England demonstrates sophisticated command complexity. Guy Halsall observes that this force maintained operational coherence over years despite being composed of multiple independent contingents under different leaders. This indicates organizational structures that effectively balanced autonomy with coordination, allowing simultaneous operations across wide geographical areas while maintaining strategic alignment. According to research by Shane MacLeod, physical positioning in combat reflected command relationships. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites like Fulford suggests leaders fought from the center of formations, allowing optimal communication to warriors on both flanks. Runestone inscriptions frequently mention warriors who fell beside their lords, confirming the expectation that elite retainers would form a protective core around their leaders during intense combat. The most distinctive element of Viking leadership was the blending of political and military authority. Unlike many contemporary European societies where military command might be delegated to specialized warriors, Norse chieftains led from the front, their political legitimacy directly tied to personal combat prowess. The English monk Alfric specifically noted how Norse kings derived respect and fellowship from demonstrating exceptional courage and skill in battle rather than purely from hereditary status. Beyond their martial skills, Vikings demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare. Terry Gunnell, specialist in Norse rituals, argues that early Viking raids appear to have been calculatedly brutal, aimed at generating terror as much as obtaining wealth. Arab diplomat Ibn Fadlan described warriors with elaborate tattoos covering their arms. Textile archaeologist Lise Bender-Jorgensen suggests that even Viking clothing could serve psychological purposes, with certain dyes and patterns associated with elite warrior status. Contemporary descriptions of Norse warriors rhythmically dancing, striking their weapons against shields, and emitting shouts before combat suggest ritualized displays designed to intimidate enemies and inspire allies. Viking battle standards frequently featured images of predators such as wolves, eagles, or ravens. The most notorious was the raven banner associated with the dynasty of Ragnar Lodbrok, which according to the Orkney saga waved as if the woven raven were alive. This sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare contradicts the image of the Viking as a simple, brutal raider. Norse leaders deliberately employed fear as a force multiplier, recognizing that terrified enemies rarely fought effectively. The Battle of Edington in 878 represented the first significant setback for Viking expansion in England, when the great heathen army was defeated by the forces of King Alfred of Wessex. Guy Halsall notes that Edington demonstrates Viking strategic vulnerabilities, including extended supply lines and difficulty maintaining political cohesion among independent leaders. The Battle of Hafrsfjord, approximately in 872, offers a contrasting perspective as a confrontation between Norse forces while Harald Fairhair consolidated control over Norway. Descriptions in Heimskringla reveal sophisticated use of boarding tactics and specific formations for ship-to-ship combat. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 effectively marks the end of the Viking Age. The decisive defeat of King Harald Hardrada of Norway by Saxon forces revealed how former Viking targets had developed effective defensive capabilities. These battles reveal consistent strategic patterns, including a preference for engaging in battle on favorable terms, often near waterways that facilitated potential retreat. Vikings demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the importance of strategic intelligence. Shane MacLeod has documented multiple instances where minor raids preceded major operations, apparently designed to assess defensive responses. Claire Downham argues that Norse leaders understood that their comparative advantages diminished proportionally with distance from the sea and campaign duration, explaining their more transient presence in areas far from the coast. Viking influence on European military evolution transcends their own conquests. Their techniques, technologies, and tactical concepts catalyzed fundamental transformations in how Europeans conceptualized and conducted war. The most significant contribution was the revolution in strategic mobility. Richard Unger argues that before the Viking period, Western European kingdoms treated seas and rivers primarily as defensive barriers. After experiencing Norse naval power projection, they fundamentally reconfigured their strategic concepts. This transformation is archaeologically visible in coastal defensive systems such as Alfred the Great's Buzz. Vikings introduced the concept of professional mobile forces independent of traditional feudal obligations. Richard Abels documents how the late Anglo-Saxon housecarls derived directly from Scandinavian precedents, representing a significant deviation from military systems based on temporary levies. Technologically, Vikings catalyzed significant armament innovations. Metallurgical analyses by Alan Williams demonstrate that advanced sword forging techniques spread significantly through Viking-Frankish interactions. European defensive architecture was fundamentally transformed by the Viking threat. Guy Halsall shows clear correlation between Viking activity and fortification evolution, observing systematic change toward low, thick, functional structures specifically designed to resist assaults. The development of feudal heavy cavalry shows signs of reaction to Viking tactics. Kelly DeVries notes that the need for rapid mobile response to unpredictable raids significantly accelerated the development of permanently maintained cavalry forces. More fundamentally, Vikings transformed the geographical scale of European strategic thinking. Leif Inge Peterson argues that Viking activity effectively connected previously isolated military theaters, forcing rulers to conceptualize defenses on a continental scale. Reconstructing Viking combat tactics and techniques presents unique methodological challenges that have generated vigorous academic debates. Judith Jesch identifies three main categories of evidence with distinctive limitations. Archaeological evidence includes weapons, fortifications, and human remains. Contemporary textual evidence was generally written by victims or enemies. Norse sagas, while detailed, were written centuries after the events they describe. The debate about sagas as military sources is particularly intense. The hypercritical position, articulated by Sverrir Jakobsen, holds that Icelandic sagas primarily reflect late medieval sensibilities. The continuous position, defended by Jesse Byock, argues that combat descriptions preserve techniques orally transmitted from the authentic Viking age. Dawn Hadley notes that funerary contexts, our primary source of Viking weapons, represent ritualized deposits that may not exactly reflect equipment used in life. Sue Brunning adds that distinguishing between actual combat wear and ritual damage requires sophisticated forensic analysis, often impossible with historical artifacts. Recent archaeological advances have significantly transformed the debate. Discoveries at Ridgeway Hill and Weymouth have provided direct forensic evidence of Viking violence victims. Britt Bailey observes that these findings provide unfiltered snapshots of actual combat tactics, free from the interpretive layers that complicate textual sources. The emerging academic consensus, articulated by Neil Price, favors a critical integrative approach that triangulates between different categories of evidence, recognizing the limitations of each while seeking consistent patterns among them. As our understanding of historical Viking warriors has become more sophisticated, the gap between popular representations and historical reality has considerably widened. The most prevalent distortions include the uncontrolled berserker. Roderick Dale argues that far from being uncontrollable lunatics, these elite warriors represented specialized forces strategically employed at critical moments. Another common myth presents Vikings as superhuman giants. Charlotte Hidensti Erna Johnson confirms through osteological analyses that Norse warriors, while robust, did not differ dramatically in size from other contemporary European populations. William Short debunks the notion of technologically primitive Vikings, demonstrating that their weapons represented some of the most advanced of their era, combining metallurgical innovations with sophisticated ergonomic design. The true Viking legacy lies in less glamorous but more consequential innovations. Neil Price synthesizes how before the Viking Age, distance provided fundamental security. Afterward, no European coastal settlement could assume immunity from attacks. The deliberately cultivated, terrifying reputation of the Norse represented an early form of information operations. Janet Nelson documents how fear of Vikings frequently paralyzed effective defensive responses. Stephen Harrison observes consistent evidence of Vikings incorporating innovations from conquered peoples, from English construction techniques to Frankish cavalry tactics, demonstrating exceptional tactical adaptability. Guy Halsall concludes that the Viking Revolution in warfare was not a matter of technological superiority or superhuman ferocity, but their ability to completely reconceptualize strategic possibilities, turning geographical obstacles into avenues of attack. This legacy of disciplined, unconventional thinking represents their most significant contribution to military history. Subscribe now, become a member, turn on notifications, share this video with your friends, and leave a comment so we can compare our knowledge and sources. Thank you for following our channel. Until our next strategic journey, here at Warriors of the World.